It's all nonsense. Soup to nuts. It's absurd. Unlike the thing with Colombia, right, which was a real win by Trump, very minor, right? The fight was basically about we wanted to expatriate people on military planes, and they said, no, it has to be commercial planes. And Colombia caved. So now we can send military planes. Woohoo! Yeah, that's symbolic. I mean, it was a real win. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Kudos. America's great now. Thank you. But the problem with this stuff is that, first of all, on Friday night, Donald Trump is asked in the Oval Office, is there anything Canada and Mexico or China can do to avoid these tariffs? And he says no, because these tariffs are an economic measure. They are justified in their own right. This is not a negotiating tactic. Okay, so already we're not negotiating right now. If you don't say do X or I'll do, if you have no quo for your quid pro, then you're not negotiating, right? You're just doing something unilaterally. And then, I mean, I wrote my LA Times column about this the day it happened. The stock markets started to tank. And I wrote a column saying, thank God for the stock market. Because that's the only thing that other than sometimes polls, it's the only thing that Donald Trump will listen to when it tells him something he doesn't want to hear, right? And he likes to think that the stock market is a barometer of the success of his presidency. And when the stock market goes down, it freaks him out. And so he caved. He just unilaterally caved on his own measure. The Mexicans and the Canadians gave him some face-saving press releases, not really any new policies. It was just simply, okay, here's the stuff we already promised we're going to do. Now we're going to do it. You can take credit for it. Oh, and I guess we'll throw in a fentanyl czar. Woo! Right? So, and then the MAGA people, the Trump people, all take credit as if this is a huge success for this policy and proof that he was just doing it as a negotiating tactic. Well, if he had already gotten the stuff that he got as a result of this before he did any of it and threatened it, then it's not a negotiating win. And moreover, the costs of this are ginormous, right? If you're a corporation that has to make decisions about your supply chains going forward, what are you going to do next, right? You don't know, what happens at the end of these next 30 days. It creates a climate of uncertainty. There is no rational reason to have gone after Canada at all in any of this. The fact that he was willing to have a different tariff rate for oil concedes the point that tariffs are not good for American consumers, right? It's like tariffs are good for American consumers, according to Trump, but we don't want to raise the cost of oil from Canada, so we'll make it a lower tariff rate. He's conceding the point of the critics of tariffs have been making all along. And then when he has, so like my basic problem with this is not falsifiable. You can't say, oh, but for this, he wouldn't have gotten that, right? And it's basically like fishing with dynamite. And then whatever floats up to the top after your stick of dynamite blows up, you're like, that's the thing I meant to catch, right? He didn't know what he was going to get out of this. It was just to create chaos. And it's part of his larger pattern of creating crises that he then solves and takes credit for, because he likes that constant sense of drama, and it helps him, and it throws Democrats off, and it throws the media off, and it gives his critics something to freak out about, and then they get to make fun of him when the worst case scenarios don't transpire. So people are taking his bait, but this was ludicrous on its face. I just did CNN this morning, and I half defended Trump on the Gaza thing. Because, I mean, let me stipulate up front, the actual idea of the United States taking over the Gaza Strip is amazeballs stupid, and unworkable and complicated. And depending on how you did it, possibly a war crime. Ethnic cleansing, is a war crime. Moving populations against their will is a war crime. Now, if you could bribe them or come up with some sort of framework where you could get them to voluntarily do it, that's great. The problem is, if they were the kind of people that were open to being voluntarily moved, Gaza Strip wouldn't be a problem in the first place, right? And the and if they were the kind of people that were open to be like sort of moved to build a better life, then a lot of these neighboring countries would have taken them in a long time ago. I mean, there's just a lot of chicken and the egg thing here, right? When Biden built that pier, I thought kind of stupidly, to provide aid, Hamas fired on it, right? The idea that we're just going to move the caterpillars and the earth moving equipment in there and fix all of this and turn it into a spa is absurd. That said, I agree with you entirely on this rhetorical point, which is that we have had this pattern now for a half century of Palestinian radicals, terrorists, murdering a bunch of Jews, whether it's Munich or, on October 7th or everything in between during the first or second intifadas, all that. Israel responds. Everyone condemns Israel. And then all this money comes in and they rebuild the damage that Israel does. And the clock starts over again, right? Days since unjustified terrorist attack, sign goes back to zero. And all the NGOs, all the international institutions, all of the cookie pushers at the State Department, they all have this as their muscle memory of just recreating this pattern over and over and over again, because everything else is supposedly unthinkable. And then Trump comes in and proposes something that is legitimately unthinkable, but at the same time, it sends this signal and says, listen, you guys, you thought you're just going to do this all over again. There are consequences to October 7th. They're different, and we're not going to fall back into that same pattern of argument and all kind of stuff. And like, the stuff America could support can be more than just like giving a little extra help to settlements and radical, settlers in Israel. It could be like hardcore all in on the side of Israel. And that, at the very least, just probably shakes Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries who are probably dug in on other things they wanted for the, to continue the Solomon Accords or whatever they're called. They're now like, well, that seems more reasonable to give in on now if we can forestall this thing. It reminds me, I remember reading once that Henry Kissinger would go into negotiations during the Vietnam War and would freak everyone out by opening up by saying that he accepted all of the other side's positions and demands and was just going to go all in on it. And they were like, oh crap, what does he see that we don't see? Hold on a second, maybe we don't really want X or Y, maybe that was this thing, right? And shattering people's expectations, I think, has real value. Whether this administration has the follow through on it to take advantage of it, I don't know. And just the last point, this is a wild gift to Bibi Netanyahu. I don't think Bibi wants America to take over the Gaza Strip either, right? But this is a fantasy of a lot of the hardcore right-wing guys in his cabinet who've been thinking about leaving. And if this is even remotely on the table, they're going to stick in this cabinet for a while. So this was a real gift to Bibi. And again, if you could do this peacefully, where you actually made better lives for the Palestinians and they got out of the Gaza Strip, I'd be open to the idea. I think it's nonsense. And it does make J.D. Vance and a lot of these people look ridiculous, who are talking about how all Liz Cheney and those people want is more foreign wars in the Middle East. And here's this guy saying, okay, actually, we're going to extend the Monroe Doctrine to the friggin' Gaza Strip. But there you go.